Hi. So welcome. I won't tell you this, but it's my third take because there are some things I want to talk to you about. So you've already seen me make a fool of myself, making sure that you understand the difference between a change in the quantity demanded. Remember, the only thing that makes that happen or movement along the demand curve is a change in price. Everything else causes the demand curve to shift or jump. Okay, so what we're going to do in this objective is we're going to talk a little bit more about demand. We're going to show you a table, we're going to show you a graph, and then we're going to show you an equation. So let's jump into it. And before I do that, one of the things I'd like to do is to talk to you a little bit about the mathematics of all of this in terms of the graph itself. So remember back from mathematics class at some point in your life, we have a coordinate planes, right? So I think it goes, this is coordinate plane 1, 2, 3, and 4, okay? All right. Now, if we look here at the center, that's the origin, we have 0, 0. In coordinate plane 1, so I'm going to take 1 and blow it up. The horizontal here is the x-axis, and the y is the vertical axis, and we're at 0, 0. We know in coordinate plane 1 that everything is positive in coordinate plane 1. So we're going to talk about this idea in context of how do we do economics with this and the marriage of mathematics, if you will. For us, the x-axis is always going to be the quantity. Okay. The y-axis is always going to be price. Okay. Now you might be asking yourself, well, how does that correlate to the mathematical linear equation of y equals mx plus b? Now, if you remember back from linear equations, one of the things you learned is that y tends to be what we call our dependent variable. M is our slope. X is our independent variable. And B here is our y-intercept, meaning when y is 0, this is where we're at. Whoops. Okay. Now, that's weird. If you think about trying to marry the equation, where are you? When you try to marry this equation here, because we're saying that the price is dependent on the quantity, and that's actually backwards. So many times in economics, we use what we call an inverse demand function so that it lines up with the graph, and I'm going to talk about that in a little bit. So for right now, let's just accept that X is going to be the quantity, Y is going to be the price. Okay? And then I'll talk about that in a few minutes. All right. So let's talk about this demand. First of all, we have the quantity demanded. What exactly does that mean? That's the number of buyers that are both willing and able to purchase. Think about something you might be willing to purchase, but you're unable to do so due to resource constraints. This is why we know that we all make trade-offs, which sounds like opportunity cost. In fact, it is. Okay? Now, our first really important aspect here is called the law of demand. The law of demand says that there is an inverse relationship or negative correlation between price and quantity. What does that mean? It means as the price increases, less people perhaps are able or become unwilling, so the quantity demanded decreases. Okay? If the price decreases, the quantity demanded increases. Now, that's only part of the story. One of the things we have to say in order for the law of demand to be true is we have to draw some constraints around this. And what that means is I can say As the price increases, the quantity demanded decreases, other things equal. All else held constant. If you really want to be all that in a can of Spam, you can say certus paribus, which is Latin for all else held constant. Okay. Again, I can say as the price decreases, quantity demanded increases, all else held constant. Now I'm correct. If I don't say that all else held constant, then guess what? I'm incorrect. So that's important to watch, especially for testing times. So the law of demand says there's this inverse relationship that when price increases, quantity demanded decreases. All right, so what exactly does that mean? It means that if we look at this idea of relationship between price and quantity, so let's go ahead and draw a graph here. And I'm going to, again, put quantity along the x-axis. I'm going to put price along the y-axis, and I'm here at 0, 0. I can tell you that in a demand curve, that it is going to look like this. This is going to be a demand curve. Why? Because the law of demand. Notice that some people are up here willing to pay a high price, and some people are down here willing to pay not as much. So think of the demand curve like a bunch of individuals standing in line. Also, I know, let me just pull up a different color here so you can see this. Oh, that's the same color. All right. I know that if I have a price of, say, $4, and I follow it over to the demand curve, and I drop it down, and let's just say 100. I'm just making this up. So I have a price of $4, and I have 100 people that are willing to purchase this. If the price is slashed in half, or the price goes down to P2, we'll call that $2, and I follow it over to the demand curve, the law of demand says as the price decreases, the quantity demanded increases, all else held constant. So now I have twice as many buyers that are willing and able to purchase. So one of the reasons why the demand curve is negatively sloped is due to the law of demand. As the price decreases, like in this example, the quantity demanded increases. If the price were to increase, the quantity demanded decreases, and remember to say, all else held constant or other things equal. On this slide, we also talk about the different ways we can look at demand. The first one is a table, which I'm going to show you in an example just a moment. The graph, as I've shown you here, and then a demand equation. All right, so we have individual demand, which would be one person's demand, this one, for example, or we can put them all together to kind of show market demand. And that's really what we do in the course. Okay, so I think I've done a good job with that one. Again, you might ask yourself right here, why is the demand curve negatively sloped? And take a minute, think about that. Right, because the law of demand, as the price increases, the quantity demanded decreases. If that's all you said, be careful. You want to say all else held constant, other things equal, or certus paribus. We tend to abbreviate a lot and make a lot of little things here. Again, as the price decreases, the quantity demanded increases, certus paribus, or all else held constant. All right, so here are the three different ways we can look at a demand. The first one is we have price quantity of ice cream cones, all right? So here is the price of ice cream cones, right? If we give them away, Catherine, and we're just talking about Catherine now, so this is her individual demand. Okay, if we give them away, she'll eat 12 of them. Yeah, okay. As the price increases or goes up from none to say 6, right? So the price is increasing. What is happening to her quantity demanded of ice cream, it's going down. Oops, quantity demanded decreases. Okay? So that's one way we can look at this. All right? Now, if you're just looking at the demand schedule, you can come up with this equation. All right? Using y equals mx plus b. Now, we're not going to use a ton of this, and I'll walk you through every step, but you need to be able to kind of marry it up. Okay, so what do I mean? I mean, if I put 0 in here for P, 2 times 0 is 0 plus 6, so the quantity demanded would be 6. Notice how that proves out my table. Okay. All right, so we can look at it as an equation. We can look at it as a schedule. Now, if you're looking at the schedule, I want you to think incrementally or at the margin. You remember from chapter 1 that economists like to look at the margin. Notice as the price increases by $1, so the price is increasing by $1. What's happening to her quantity demanded? It's decreasing by -2. By the way, this equation is wrong. It should be -2p. Okay, so we can graph it. So that's another way to look at it. So we have a table, we have a graph, and we have an equation. So those are the 3 ways that we can look at demand. Again, remember, if you're going to say something about this, is the price increases, the quantity demanded decreases, all else held constant, or other things equal. So we not only deal with individual demands, we deal with market demands. So if we took Catherine in the previous example, Paul, Shirley, okay, everybody who likes ice cream cones, then we add them up. Okay, and that becomes the market demand. So just remember that when you look at a demand curve, it represents a bunch of individuals' willingness to pay. So I think my next example kind of shows that. Okay, so here we have Catherine and we have Nicholas, and we add up their individual demands to get their market demand. And that's primarily what we deal with. Again, take a look at this. We would have, let's see, who's willing to pay the most? Catherine is. So Catherine would be higher up here on the curve than, say, Nicholas, who would be down here on the curve. Okay, so again, what we're doing is just adding up individual demand curves. So this represents, again, just Catherine's demand plus Nicholas' demand ends up being market demand. We don't really call it market demand, we just call it demand at this point. Okay, so you learned in our introductory that the only thing that causes a change in the quantity demanded is price. Everything else causes a shift in the demand curve. So the first panel, what we see here is an increase in demand. So we start with D and it shifts to D1. And we're going to talk about why that would happen in just a few moments. Remember, the thing that's not going to happen here is it's not going to change price. It's going to be some other factor that changes. For example, population shift might cause an increase in the population, or the number of people might cause the demand curve for a particular product or service to increase. A decrease in demand, and sometimes I label it D or D2, but I do try to make a difference so that you understand. A decrease in demand, what's going to cause that? Not price. It's going to be, for example, the demand curving shifting inward. This is a morbid thought, but I am the dismal science, right? COVID. Okay, the demand curve for certain goods and services shifting inward as a result. Now, price didn't change, but people are staying home, so restaurants closed, so on. So this is what we're seeing here in the COVID crisis, is a demand curve shifting inward for those things that people perceive as high risk. Okay, so an increase in demand is outward to the right. Okay, and again, I like to think of it like you're kind of like laying here, okay, thinking like on a lawn chair or something. Boy, that's a really sad little good person. But if you're looking out, an increase shift outward to the right, a decrease inward and to the left. And I do try to always say inward and outward so that you understand. Now, let me ask you this. Is this a change in demand or a change in quantity demanded? If you said it's a change in demand, you're correct, right? Because a change in demand is that shift or that jump, okay? So some other factor other than price caused this to happen. So what are those things that cause a demand curve to jump? Well, easiest way to say is everything other than price. But there are some particular ones that we want to talk about. The first one we're going to talk about is income, right? So if you get a raise, okay, or if you lose your job, prices don't change, but your demand changes. So this would be a change in demand, right? Change in demand. Prices of related goods. What if you have batteries that go on sale? Are you battery conscious? Do you buy a certain type only because it's a good type, or do you buy it based upon price? So sometimes if you have a product like you have Duracell batteries versus Duracell versus Rayovac, and Rayovac goes on sale, right? Its price goes down. Then the quantity demanded is going to increase. This, in Rayovac, is a change in the quantity demanded. Well, where did these people come from? They came from Duracell, right? Because these are perceived as substitutes for one another, people decided to leave the Rayovac battery. So we actually would see an inward shift in the demand curve for Duracell, and they would go to the Rayovac. So here we have a change in demand of Duracell, which causes a change in the quantity demanded of Rayovac. So we're going to talk about that. Tastes. Okay, tastes. You know, think about green movement and saving our planet. People no longer want things that are non-biodegradable. So we see that the demand curve for green, okay, is shifting outward and to the right because people are worried more about climate change and those things. Price of those things didn't change. They may eventually. But taste, what are we thinking? What are societal norms? Those kinds of things. Expectations is another one. Expectations, how many of us expected to have to wear masks? Those kinds of things. This happens a lot in the marketplace in terms of expectations. You know, one of the things we see is hoarding right now, right? So here's quantity and here's price. I can tell you that the demand for toilet paper did this, right? To a whole different graph. Why? Because people expected it wouldn't be available, so they hoarded it today. Now, eventually the price might go up. But in this case, it was not an increase or a decrease in the price of toilet paper that caused the shift in demand. It was people's expectations. Number of buyers, again, population shifts. Okay, can cause these changes in demand. So let's take a look. Let's first discuss income. Income, we break this into two categories. The first category is a normal good. Normal goods, if you get an increase in income, let's just call it a raise, that just makes it easier. Then what's going to happen is your demand is going to increase for normal goods. If you've ever gotten a slight raise, like maybe, I don't know, 10%, you started to make changes. You went to the grocery store perhaps and said, you know what? I got that raise. I'm going to buy butternut instead of Great Value. I got that raise. I'm going to have a steak this week as opposed to hamburger. It wasn't the prices that drove your behavior. It was the idea that you got an increase in income. So what we see happen is when income, and I'm going to use big I here for income, is when income increases, your demand for normal goods, things like name brands, higher end, designer clothing, stuff like that, is going to increase. So when income increases, your demand for normal goods increases. So this is a shift. It would look like this: quantity, price, and let's call this, I don't know, some kind of name brand. Nike, okay, that's bringing to mind. So what we would see is, here is our original demand curve. You get a raise, your demand curve shifts outward to D2. Price is going to remain the same. Think of it like dominoes. The first effect is what we're interested in here. So the price is remaining the same here at P1. But notice that our quantity increases greatly. Why? Because our income increased. All right. Let's talk about the second type that we can have, and that's an inferior good. Inferior goods are things like used goods, new to you, okay? All of these things are inferior. I watched a commercial the other day where they're selling imperfect fruit. Yeah, okay, whatever. Poorly cut salmon or something like that. Okay, those would be inferior because they are not what we would dictate as normal, okay? Might be day old, okay? But that's not the products they're selling, but anyway. So inferior goods. Now, what happens here is the opposite effect. If your income goes up, you want less of those. Oops, C-O-M-E goes up. The demand for those types of goods goes down. Okay? So in this case, you're going to buy you a new car as opposed to a used car. You're going to buy Nike shoes as opposed to Keds. So again, still keeping with the income going up. Here's our price. Here's our quantity. Here's our demand curve. What's going to happen when you get a raise is the demand curve will shift inward and to the left to D2. Notice the price didn't change, but what happened is the quantity went down, Q1, Q2. Okay, now anytime I draw arrows in these slides, the opposite is also true. So let's just look at this and say, what if you lost your job, right? Now your income is decreasing. Well, do you want as many normal goods? Probably not. You're probably going to shop more at my favorite store, Goodwill. So what's going to happen there is the demand for those goods, the demand for normal goods is going to go down, right? If you lost your income. Likewise, if you lose your income for inferior goods, you might go more to Dollar General, Aldi's. So now when your income goes down, your demand for these goods goes up. All right, so this is an important concept, and I really want you to take note of it because we'll see it again in chapter 5. So notice when our income went up, right here, our income went up, our demand went up. When our income went down, our demand went down. So one of the things I want you to notice, for normal goods, there is positive correlation between income and demand. Or we could say quantity demanded in this case. Look at what happened here. In inferior goods, again, day old, used, new to you, when our income went up, our demand went down. When our income went down, our demand went up. So we're going to note that these are negative correlation. One goes up, the other one goes down, all else held constant. So when income and the quantity demanded through demand are going to be negatively correlated. Just something to note for upcoming chapters. Now, at this point, we're going to talk about substitutes and complements. Substitutes are two goods that are related to each other. So we're going to call these related goods. We have substitutes and we have complements. Substitutes are ones that you would use in place of the other, and you yourself would see absolutely no difference in the utility of that good or that service. So what is the utility? It's the want satisfying power of a good or service. So I just gave you an example of Rayovac versus Duracell. Okay. These to me personally, are substitutes. They're both batteries. So if I put in Rayovac batteries versus Duracell, doesn't matter to me as long as the channel changes, right? Okay. So what happens is we have an effect, a price effect, which causes a quantity demanded effect in one good, say good A here, which causes a change in demand of good B. Okay? So again, kind of using my other example. Okay. So here we have Rayovac. I'm going to draw quantity and price. Here's our demand curve for Rayovac, D1. Let's say Rayovac right now is $2. Okay? And we have 100 people that want it. Rayovac goes on sale. So 50% off, okay? Ooh. So now they're $1. We know that when the price decreases, the quantity demanded increases, and we'll put that at 200. So here in Rayovac, as the price decreased, the quantity demanded increased, all else held constant. But where did those 100 people come from? Those 100 people came from Duracell. Because essentially what happens is, again, I'm going to draw price and quantity. Here's our demand curve for Duracell. Now, because Duracell and Rayovac are in the same battery aisle, some people, because of the change in price, are going to buy Rayovac this time. Notice that the price of Duracell doesn't change immediately, but the quantity demanded does end up decreasing. Why? Because we end up with a change in demand. Because the price of Rayovac went down. So here, the graph of Rayovac is a change in the quantity demanded, which caused a change in demand for Duracell. Okay? Complements. Complements are two goods used together, and there are various degrees of complements. There are what we call true complements. In true complements, you can't use one without the other. They just simply don't work, okay? Batteries in a clicker, okay? What about the idea of having a video game? All right, so you have a PS4, but you have no games, nor do you have an internet connection to get it, okay? So, games. These are true complements, meaning what do you have a PS4 for if you have no internet connection and no games loaded on it? So you can't use one without the other. That's a true complement. Some other complements, you know, peanut butter and jelly, there's all kinds of different ones that we could look at. So when we look at the complements, These are goods that are used together. Okay? All right. So let's take, okay. So here, two things used together. I'm going to go back to my battery example, my clicker, because I kind of like that one today, because I just had to change batteries in my clicker. That's why I'm on this. Okay. So here's quantity, here's price, here's price, here's quantity. Okay. So let's say, we'll call this universal remotes. And here we'll say batteries. Okay. So I'm going to start with a demand curve. We'll just call it D here. We'll see what happens. So let's say that we have a big sale on universal remotes. Okay. I know I'm showing my age, but let's say that they were $8 because we need a starting point. So there's P1 and 1,000 people wanted them. Q1. So now we run a 50% off sale. Woo, yeah, man, woo, on those. So now we're going to decrease the price to $4. So we'll call that P2, $4. We're going to follow that over to our demand curve. And now we're going to say 2,000 people want them, Q2. Think about it for just a moment. The universal remotes, is that a change in demand or a change in the quantity demanded? If you answered a change in the quantity demanded, you're right. Because what changed? What changed was price. Okay. Now we got 1,000 people in the store walking around with their brand new remotes. They're so excited. But then they say, oh man, batteries not included. God, love them. So now what's going to happen in batteries? The demand curve is going to shift outward and to the right to D1. And we're going to see price remains the same of batteries, but now more people want them. So that becomes a change in demand. Because what caused that shift or that jump increase in the demand curve was a complement. You needed batteries to work that remote. Okay, before I leave this slide, I want to capture something that I thought was important as well. In substitutes, okay, so if you have the price of, I'm going to say A and B are substitutes. They can be used in price of one another. If the price of A increases, we know the quantity demanded will decrease, all else held constant. And people will then buy good B. So the demand for good B increases or shifts outward to the right. Notice in substitutes, when the price increased in good A, it caused the demand for good B to increase or shift outward to the right. We want to note that this is positive. This is positively correlated. So when the price of A went up, the demand for B went up because they're substitutes. Now in complements, let me just change up my colors here because I love to use different colors. Just makes me think better. In complements, these two goods are used together. So A plus B. In substitutes, A equals B. I should put not equal. A equals B. All right, so now here in complements, as the price of remotes decreases, the quantity demanded for remotes increases, all else held constant. And that then causes the demand for remotes to increase. I'm sorry, demand for batteries to increase. So what we have under complements, notice that as the price went down of good A, the demand for good B increased or shifted outward to the right. Here we see they are negatively correlated. And we want to note that because, again, we're going to be working with some stuff later on, and we're going to need to mathematically prove whether it's a complement or whether it's a substitute. Okay, tastes, again, are another one. And again, when we talk about tastes and preferences, what do we think is going to happen? If we see headlines, many times this is media driven, okay? Advertising. And your discussion for chapter 4 talks a little bit about that. So I think it's kind of interesting. Tastes and preferences. What do we expect is going to happen? Right now, we're watching the stock market become very explosive because not only do we have recessionary concerns, but trade concerns and many things going on in the larger macro environment, which are affecting us, let alone COVID. So here's one thing. If we expect a decrease in our income, right? So a lot of people ran out of unemployment insurance. So if we think our income is going to go down, how is that going to affect? Well, normal goods, we know the demand for normal goods is going to go down, right? Inferior goods, the demand for those will go up. Okay. We're going to see people purchasing more hamburger and less ground beef. I mean, so when you think about this, the expectations of what we think will happen, and expectations are fascinating because it's sometimes difficult to see what consumers will in fact do in a certain situation or how they're feeling. So we do the consumer sentiment survey, okay? And we kind of ask people, how do you feel about what's going on today in your world? And then we kind of propel that into a larger concept of what we think might be happening. Number of buyers. Again, if we talk about population, one of the things we know in the US is people are waiting longer to have children and they're having less children. I will say that there is some supposition that because of that fact, that the $99 trillion pet food industry. So maybe we're substituting kids for pets. Don't know. I just know when my daughter left for college, I ended up getting another dog. So when we think about why markets are behaving and things are happening the way they are, it's usually because of how consumers are making decisions. Okay, I love this particular table. It is in your ebook. And I think it does a good job of representing that the only thing that causes a change in the quantity demanded, right there, is price. All right, price, baby. That's the only thing that causes a change in the quantity demanded. Everything else that you can think about, right, causes a change in demand, the jump of that curve, and the price causes movement or a shift. No, movement or sliding and gliding along that demand curve. Okay, now let's try this out, see how we do. Draw a demand curve for music downloads. What happens to it in each of the following scenarios and why? So downloading from, say, iTunes, okay? All right. So the price of iPods falls. Now, this is how we're going to do this. Yes, there's a price word there, but I don't want you to think about that. I want you to think about the subject. So we have iPods. What are iPods to music downloads? Are they substitutes? Are they complements? What are they? Okay. Let's see what our next question asks. The price of a music downloads falls. Well, we're interested in the effect of music downloads. And here we see the price of music downloads. So is that a change in demand or a change in quantity demanded? And then what does it look like? The last one, the price of vinyl falls. So records fall. Now we're going to say, okay, what is a vinyl to a music download? And some people may say that that is a substitute. Okay? So now that we know kind of what's going on here, let's go ahead and take a look at what happens. So the first question, I think I have this. Yeah, there we go. So let's take this scenario and let's say, okay, we're interested in music downloads. So I'm gonna put music downloads on the graph on the left, and I'm gonna put iPods on the graph on the right. Okay, so A, so let's do A. So in A, the price of iPods falls. So let's say we're here at iPods. I have no idea how much they are. Let's say $100. I have no clue. And we need a starting point. So I'm gonna start from 1,000 just because I like to use those numbers. So here's P1 and here's Q1. All right, so let's make the price of iPods fall to say $50. So that would be P2. So price decreased. What do we automatically know? That the quantity demanded is going to increase, all else held constant. And so we're going to end up here at Q2. So the price decreased, the quantity demanded increased, all else held constant. Is that a change in demand or change in quantity demanded? If you answered a change in the quantity demanded, you're right, because what changed here? Price. We're interested in what's the effect on music downloads. So I would say that iPods and music downloads are definitely complements. They have to be used together. So let's say that a music download is, I don't know, $1.99. I don't even know. Just guessing. And here we have like 10,000 people that want them. Okay, so here's our P1 at $1.99. Here's our Q1 at 10,000. Now, iPod's price falls. What's going to happen here to music downloads? It's going to shift outward and to the right because these people need music to play on their new iPods. Notice the price stays the same in the short term, and we shift out to D1. Is this a change in demand or a change in quantity demanded? You're right if you said this is a change in demand. Okay? All right. Erase that, and let's go to the next one. The price of a music download falls. So I'm going to put music downloads here on the left. I'm just going to use $1.99 again because that's what I used before. I think I used 10,000 last time. I don't remember. And so here's P1 at $1.99. Here's Q1 at 10,000. Price of music downloads falls. So we're going to now cut that music download in half. And we're going to say 99 cents, right? Which will be P2. So we have a decrease in the price. We know that when price decreases, quantity demanded increases, all else held constant or other things equal. And this will be Q2. Is this a change in demand or change in quantity demanded? Change in the quantity demanded because what preempted this or made it happen was a change in price. Good. Okay, now let's look at the last one. The price of vinyl falls, okay? I had to update this because they actually had CDs and I was like, anyway. All right, so here's music downloads because that's one we're interested in. And here's vinyl. What are vinyl to a music download? Yeah, I know you might say, well, collectors and all that kind of thing. I get it, but you know, I'm trying to jazz up my slides. Give me a break. Okay. So let's say that vinyl records, so let's start there. So let's say that vinyl, I have no idea, are like 10 bucks. I don't know. And let's say that we have 1,000 people that want them. So here's P1 and here's Q1. And I agree, this is a little weird of an example, but work with me here. All right, so now the price of vinyl falls, and let's say it falls to $8. P2, follow it over. We know that when the price decreases, the quantity demanded increases, all else held constant. So now we have 3,000 that are demanded. Is this a change in demand or change in quantity demanded? You're right, change in quantity demand. Notice I always say you're right, even if you answered something differently, because I just assume you all got it right, because you're bright, yeah. Okay, so this is a change in the quantity demanded because what preempted this or made it happen was a change in price. Okay, so what's happening to music downloads? Okay, so they were $1.99, right?
10,000 people wanted them. Might there be a small sliver of this market that says, hey, I could buy that on vinyl, keep it around, maybe be a collector's item, yada, yada, yada. Hey, maybe, I don't know. Could happen, I suppose. And so the demand curve for music downloads is going to decrease or shift inward to the left to D2. Change in demand or change in quantity demanded? I'm going to assume you got it right. How about change in demand? Okay. Now, again, don't get lost in it, but really read carefully. And I find that most of the students, okay, so like I did that. Okay. I just want to make sure we got the right answers. And look at that. It's like I know what I'm doing. Okay. Sometimes I wonder if I do. Okay. So one thing I tell all micro students is read carefully. Take your time. In this lecture, you noticed that one word, quantity, means something totally different than if that word is missing. So what I find is that students usually know the content. They get to the exam, perhaps they are pressed for time, and they read it and they didn't really understand what they read. So they give me a wrong answer. So what I'm saying to you is slow down, particularly in testing environments. On the homework, slow down. Think about what you're reading and make sure that you're reading it carefully and interpreting it carefully. Okay, thanks. We're done with demand. I'm going to see you next time for supply. Thanks.